Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is our Agenda 17. As I mentioned a few seconds ago, this is our last agenda tied to Illustrator. So once we cut to a break after our conversation that pertains to this, we are going to start looking at InDesign, which is Illustrator's sister software. They are both vector-based softwares, so that's why I think that they're akin to one another. And they share a lot of the same features. So, like I said, after the break, we're going to start looking at other material. So you'll notice that for today's conversation, we are going to be discussing the topic of embedding versus linked images. And we are also going to discuss in brief a feature called image trace. So image trace is a feature that I do not like my students using unless I give them that specific direction. So there is an assignment in my advanced illustration class where we leverage the trace feature, but almost everything else should be drawn by you, not the software. So let's start off our conversation between embed and linked images. So let me get out of this, and I'm going to go to today's module. And as I mentioned earlier, I would like you to download that image that says Cosmos Trace. Now, Cosmos is a type of a flower, and it's a very pretty flower. So I'm going to use this as my example for today's conversation, and I'd like you to follow along. It's not a very complicated conversation. This is more of an informative conversation, so there's not an assignment tied to this. It's sort of an awareness. That's really what I would like you to acquire from today's lecture. So I'm going to save this image. All right, it's a very, very pretty image, and I'm going to, I'm struggling here with my mouse. I'm going to create a folder for myself. I love my messy desktop. I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it Lesson 17. And I'm going to place that image in that folder. So this is basically the method that I've been teaching, the strategy that I've been teaching in the class, that if you're working on a project, you should place the image in that folder. And then if I launch Illustrator and create a new file, let me close this, create a new file. I'm going to save this Illustrator file in the same folder. So I'm going to go to Lesson 17. And I'm going to call this Lesson 17 as well, underscore 001. That's been our naming system. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So I'm going to place that Cosmos image in my document. And you'll notice that towards the bottom of the window, where I'm selecting the image, you'll notice that there's an option that says linked. On yours, how many of them have a check mark where it says linked? So I have a check mark. How many of you, I'd like to see a show of hands if you guys are there. So by default, it should say linked. Now, if an image is not linked, then what is it? If it's not linked, what the software is going to do is it's going to embed it. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation about what's the difference. Okay, so by default, it should be set up to link, and frankly, that is what you should use. But once you find out what an embedded image is, you might decide you would prefer an embedded image instead. But I prefer a linked image, and I will explain why you should probably use a linked image, but there are going to be instances in which you would want to use an embed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit place. And obviously this image is too big, so I'm going to scale it down to get it to fit. And I'm going to place it again. I'm going to place it one more time, so that way I have two copies. Go ahead and hit place. I'm going to place it again. And I'm going to place this one over to the side. So the software gives us a panel that allows us to manage the images that we have placed within our document. And that panel is called the links panel. So if I go to my window menu, and I look for the links panel, I'm going to click on that, and it's going to launch this little panel for me. And you'll notice there it says links. And it gives me an outline of all of the images that I have placed in my document. So I've placed this Cosmo image twice, and as you can see, it's there 2 times. Okay, now I happen to have another image on my desktop, and maybe you have another image on the desktop. So if you do, why don't you grab an image off the desktop and place that as well. So I think I have this example that I was using in my motion graphics class. So there's a little illustration there. So you can see here that in the links panel, it gives me a thumbnail preview of all of the content that I have placed up to this point within my document. Now, you'll notice that when I select one of the line items in the links panel, it gives me a bunch of descriptive information below it. If you don't see this description, you can probably toggle the information open by clicking on this triangle. So this will open and close the information pertaining to the image. So you'll notice that it says right here the name of the file. It also gives me the file format. It says it's a PNG. Obviously, I can extract some of that by the file name. It tells me what color mode it's using, CMYK. So if it's in CMYK, the image is prepared for print or for screen. What is it prepared for? For print or for screen? CMYK. For print, correct. By the way, that reminds me, we have a quiz next time we come to class. So please bring your notes. And one of the questions are going to be, what is CMYK used for? What is RGB used for? So some pretty common questions and content that we've discussed numerous times in class. The next thing that it tells me is the location of the image. So you'll notice that it says that this image is located in the user directory in the Marco account, that's my account, on the desktop. So this image is being sourced on this particular machine on my account. Does that make sense? So it's looking for the image in that location. Now let's go to the Cosmo, see where it's looking for that one. The Cosmo image is on the desktop, but in a folder called Lesson 17. So it's a slightly different location. So this is really important because a linked image, the software is sourcing it in this specific directory, okay? On this computer, in the Marco account, on the desktop, in Lesson 17. So let's imagine I take my Illustrator file and I email just the Illustrator file to Diego. So I'm going to email the Illustrator file to Diego. Diego's going to take over the project. I started working on it and I don't have enough time. And so my project manager says, Marco, send it to Diego. He's going to wrap it up. I got to move you onto something else. So I send him the Illustrator file, but I don't send him the images. What is going to happen to these placed images? They will not appear. They will be what we think as removed. So because it's linked and it's sourcing the images in this specific directory, when Diego receives it, he tries to open the file. If I don't give him the images are going to be missing. He's going to get a blank document. Does that make sense? So linked images are being sourced in this specific location. Okay, so the question is there a solution for this? Is there an alternative where I can send Diego the file without the problem of the image being sourced on my account, on the Marco directory in Lesson 17 folder? Is there a way that I can possibly send him the file where that won't be an issue? Well, the answer is yes. There is a way that I can send him the file, but I have to do something else to the image before I can accomplish that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of the Cosmo images, and I'm going to go to the hamburger icon up here, And you'll notice that there is an option about a third of the way down that says Embed Image or Images. Do you see that? It's about a third of the way down. So if I select this option right here, it's going to change the way that the image is described. So I'm going to click on it, and then please pay attention to the panel. Let's see what's going to change. When I click on that button, you'll notice that the image in the links area now has a little icon next to the name. That icon is the visual indicator that this image is now a linked image. Okay? So you'll notice that the others do not have that. Now, when I select the Cosmo image that does not have that icon, it's still pointing to my account, to the desktop, to lesson 17, to the file name. When I click on the one that has the icon that I've embedded, you'll notice that it says the format is a JPEG, but it's an embedded file. And you'll also notice that, is it pointing to a location? No, it's not. So what has happened? An embedded image is one that actually lives in the file. It is now part of the file, and it no longer needs to source the directory. Okay, well that's great. Now why wouldn't I do that with all of my images? Because I said at the beginning of this conversation that it's best practice to work with linked images, not embedded. But embedded images are in the file. Why wouldn't I want the image to be in the file? Any ideas, any thoughts? Yes?
Because then you can alter whatever you put into the file and not have to remake the whole thing.
So, can you repeat that again?
If
If I embed it?
you embed it, then you can't alter the original image.
That is correct. If I embed the image, I cannot alter the image, say, in Photoshop or in another photo editor because it's embedded in this software. So that's a problem. There's actually another issue. Anybody else have an idea why I may not want to embed this image? The file size is increased. Now, how much is the file size increased by? Well, it depends on the image. So remember, the larger the image, the greater the pixel density, the greater the accuracy, but it also increases the file size. Now, unfortunately, Illustrator and InDesign, which is what we're going to look at in a few minutes, both of these softwares are volatile, meaning that they have a rate of crashing and corruption. InDesign isn't as volatile as Illustrator, but it has a fatal flaw, which is when the file gets too heavy, it starts to operate extremely slow. And it basically gets in the way of, what's the word? A good workflow. It gets in the way of productivity. So in Illustrator, what happens is that the file size is increased and it drastically increases the rate of corruption or failure. Your file will just tend to crash. And that's a huge problem as well. So embedding is a great, it's a great tool when I want to share a file, but it creates these other problems that I have to be careful about. Now, I want to show you what's going to happen with this file now that I have an embedded image. And I want to show you the difference between moving the file, what it's going to do with a linked image, what it's going to do with the embedded image, and then we're going to have a conversation about, well, when do we embed? Should we embed, and when do we embed? All right, so let me save this, hit save, and I'm going to close this. Okay, so here's I'm going to create a folder called For Diego. For Diego. Okay, and then I'm going to move this image in there. And then, so just as a reminder, this image is on the desktop. That's where it was when I placed it. The other images were in lesson 17, and I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this one, I want to organize my desktop. So I'm going to call this folder my organized desktop. So let's say hypothetically I started organizing everything on my desktop and I shoved everything into a folder like that, which we do in a lot of cases, right? I do that. I'm about to do that with all of these icons that I have in my desktop. So here's the Illustrator file. It's in the For Diego folder. And I'm going to double click on this. So what is going on here? It says, look, could not find the linked file, character front PNG. Choose replace. Huh. Well, I moved it to a new location. That's why it doesn't see it anymore. It's sourcing it where it was placed the moment that I linked it. Okay, so it's no longer there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit ignore. It doesn't find the Cosmo either, but it did find one of them. Okay, so which one did it find? The embedded one, because it's part of the image. So when I go to the links directory, you'll notice that I'm getting a thumbnail preview for the embedded image. I'm no longer getting a thumbnail preview for the other linked images. You'll notice that the images that are missing have an icon next to it, a warning symbol. So this is a visual indicator that, hey, this image should be there, but I can't find it. You'll also notice that the software still shows me the containers or frames where those images should be. So it's expecting them, but it doesn't know what to place there anymore. Okay, so the point in this conversation is that if we are working with linked images, we have to be very mindful of how everything is organized. And if I wanted to send Diego my file without embedding, I would have to send him my file and the images together. Now, I could also just embed the images, but that's going to increase the file size, making a greater rate of corruption. And also possibly if he needs to edit those photographs, he will not have the ability to do so. So there's pros and cons to either one of these methods. So what I'm going to do, here's a little tip for you as young designers. You'll notice that I've been suggesting that all of your images should be in the same folder. Well, what happens is that Illustrator looks for the images in the directory in which the file resides. So the Illustrator file is going to look in this folder first before it starts sourcing the links somewhere else. So I placed them all in the same folder. They should find each other now, right? So let me double click on the file again. So you'll see if they found each other. So as long as the images are in the same directory, you usually don't have any problems. So I highly advise that you work in this model in Illustrator. Now, I want to talk about when do we embed? When do we embed? Because there are instances in which you embed images, but it's actually at the end of the production cycle. What do I mean by that? So I just finished working on an advertisement selling flowers, and I need to send the image to press to get it printed. So that might be a moment where I embed the images to deliver it as a asset for production. Does that make sense? I'm done with it. It's finished. I've completed the project. I'm going to send it for press, and the pressman might request, please embed the images, so that way he doesn't have to relink them. He or she does not have to relink them. Does that make sense, everyone? So embedding is usually something you do at the end of the production cycle. So just as a reminder. So normally we worked with linked images.